welcome to Gefet and Daf. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you together with Hadran, learning a little bit more in depth, a bit of you in your limud of Daf Yomi. And today, our sugya in Daf Samchei is about what happens if you're doing a neder in front of other people. Is your audience very important, and does it have to be part of your hafarat nedarim if you want to be mefer the neder? And there's a machloket here and a very interesting Yerushalmi. So let's get into business, and we'll do Ran and Tosfot Bezrat Hashem today. Let's begin with the Gemara. The Gemara says, Hamuda brings a breita. Hamuda ana mechavero en metirim lo ela bifanav. Okay, so here we have supposedly a halacha in the breita that if there was an audience to your neder, you have to have that audience present when you're doing hafarat nedarim. Let's give an example. Let's say I just heard this example from my life. I know of young girls. My daughter just learned to drive, and she had friends who wanted really to pass their driver's test. So she made an neder that if she'll pass the driver's test, she'll daven mincha every day in the minyan. She passed the test, and then she wanted to be made for the neder. So it sounds as if she did it in front of her friends, she has to have her friends come over with her to the Rav, so he can do a hafarat nedarim. This is what's written in the Brite. So the Gemara asks, where do we know this from? Notice that the Gemara does not ask why, it asks, the Gemara has two answers here. Rav Nachman gives two stories from the Torah, one from the Torah, one from the Navi, that Moshe did a neder that he will stay in Midian, and therefore he has to go back to Midian and be made for the neder in front of Yitro. And also a harder story, we'll read through it because it's going to be discussed in the Rishonim, about Nebuchadnezzar and Tzidkiyahu. במבוכדנצר מלך בבל אשר השביעו באלוהים חיים, מים מרדותי, אשכחי צדקיהו לנבוכדנצר דהבה כאכיל ארנב החיה, אמר להשתבע לי ולא מגלית עליו ולא טיפוק מילתא. השתבע, לבסוף וכמצטער צדקיהו בגופי, אשתי לשבועתה. ואמר, שמע נבוכדנצר דקה מבזין לי, שלח בעת סנהדרין לצדקיהו, אמר להם, חזיתון מייקה אבי צדקיהו, והפך השתבע בשמי דשמע דלא מגלינן, אמר לי, אשתי לשבועתה. אמר לי, אמר לו בפניו, אפילו שלא בפניו, אמר לי בפניו. אמר לו, באתון, מה יביא דתון? מה הייתה מה לא אמרתי לצדקיהו? מיד ישבו לארץ, צידום וזקני בת ציון. אמר רבי יצחק, ששבתו כלו מתחתותיהם. Okay, so this is a very interesting story. A story about the galut. That Tzidkiyahu, the king, saw Nebuchadnezzar eat ever min achai, a live hair. And Nebuchadnezzar saw that Tzidkiyahu saw him doing this. And this is a big chet for Bnei Noach. And he said, be nishbat to me that you will not tell that you saw me doing this. And Tzidkiyahu gave him his shvuah. But then Tzidkiyahu wanted to be made for the shvuah, and the Sanhedrin allowed him to be made for the shvuah. And Nebuchadnezzar comes to the Sanhedrin and say, you did not go according to halacha. There was a halacha that you should have told me. You could not be made for the neder of Tzidkiyahu without my presence. Okay, so this is the sugya, a halacha, and two rayot from the Tanakh, Minan Emile. Where do we learn this from? That you have to have the audience present in your hafarat nedarim. Tosfot asks a few questions about the sugya, so let's just follow only his questions. Tosfot asks, it sounds as if mashma delefanav hainu debai midato. Tosfot says usually the word befanav means not only that he has to be present, but that he also has to give his consent. So the right way to read this breita is, if you had an audience, you have to have the audience present and consenting to the hafara of the neder. Okay, says the Tosfot, it's a little strange because here in the breita we're not talking about somebody who was really part of the neder who had to consent to it. We're just speaking about an audience. So why is it so important that the audience will consent? Let's take the example that I gave. You have this girl who made her neder that she will be davening in minyan, and she did it in front of her friends. Why are her friends relevant to the Rav's decision whether or not to be mefer? They're just bystanders, and they have no relevance in a neder. Okay, so this is Tosfot's first question. Tosfot's second question is, if really this is halacha, that you're not allowed to be mefer without the audience present, how could it be that the Sanhedrin itself forgot this halacha? It's a very strange ending of the sugya. So these are the questions that we're going to deal with, and the Ran is going to also deal with them, and also the Tosfot in his answers. But what we'll do is, before reading the Ran and the Tosfot, we'll look at two Makorot that they are discussing in their commentaries. So I took these Makorot out of the Ran and Tosfot. Obviously, I read first the Rishonim, and then I went to read the Gemara. But because it's easier for us in this short year, so we'll start by learning the Makorot, and then drive into the Ran. Okay, so the first makor that will be discussed in Ran and Tosfot is the Yerushalmi here in Nedarim. Yerushalmi, Nedarim Perkei Halacha Daled, has a similar sugya with a slight and important difference. Hanodeh hanara mechavero befanav, lo yisha'el lo ela befanav. Shelo befanav nishalin lo ben befanav ben shelo befanav. This is a very similar halacha to our Baraisa. But here we have a machloket. Rabbi Yochanan amar mipnei abusha, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi amar mipnei achashad. So we see that in the Yerushalmi does not ask minan emile, does not give proof from the Torah, but asks why and gives two answers why. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the reason that you have the audience present in your hafara is because habusha, that you want the person who wants to be mefer his neder to feel uncomfortable. And he will feel uncomfortable if the audience will be present in the situation. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, no, it has nothing to do with what the person is feeling. It has a lot to do with what the audience will think about this person. Mifnei achashad. Pnei Moshe explains what's mifnei achashad. If I heard somebody do a neder, and then suddenly I see like this girl, she was noted to go to mincha, and then I see that she doesn't have mincha, maybe I will think that she's a person who is not doing her nedarim. That's a very serious chashad. And since we don't want that to happen, we will have me present, so I will hear she was being made for her neder. So that's a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua, and we'll see it discussed in Iran shortly. And we have another sugya Masechet Gitin, which is a little more complex. So let's go over it quickly. In Masechet Gitin, we learn that there was a problem if a woman lost her husband and there were also children. And then there's a question, who has the rights on the money of the husband? So the almanah has rights from her ketubah, and the yatomim have to get the rest. Now the yatomim are not sure that this woman, who might be their mother or their stepmother, right? It could be a more complex family. They're not sure. Maybe she already took money from the husband while he was alive. Maybe she was already gova her ketubah b'chayav. So they don't want to give her ketubah. What did Rabban Gamliel do? First, the halacha was that she could not take anything without being nishbat. But shvuah is something very dangerous, so they stopped doing shvuah. The almanot did not want to do shvuot. So Rabban Gamliel made a takana that she will be noderet le'yatomim kol ma sheyirtzu v'gova miktubata. That the yatomim will tell her, okay, so do a neder that if you took something from your husband, you'll be asura on these perot or something like that. So neder is not on the same level. It's easier than a shavua, and that's how the almanot got their ketubot. Says the Gemara, this takana of Rabban Gamliel netikun olam worked only if this woman was not about to get married, because if she was about to get married very, very quickly, a neder would not be good because her husband can be made for her neder. And continues the Gemara and says, well, maybe it's wouldn't work anyway, because any neder you can go to a chacham and be made for the neder. And says the Gemara, no, when you go to a chacham, you really have to tell the chacham what the neder was, and then the chacham will hear that it was a neder for a yatomim, and he would not be made for the neder. Why is this Gemara important to our discussion? Because you see that the Gemara here does not assume that the yatomim have to be present in the hafara of the neder, not in the husband's situation and not in the Rav situation. So it looks as if this Gemara is contradicting our Gemara. So we have here two sugiyot. One is the Yerushalmi giving us two different explanations to why you have to have a person present if he was part of the audience. And you also see a Gemara in Masechet Gittin that seems to contradict our Gemara in Masechet Nedarim. Now we're ready to read the Rishonim. Let's start with the Ran. The Ran says, Tanya hamudar hana'am לחברו אין מתירים לו אלא בפניו. איכא מאן דאמר דדווקא כשהנדר לצורך חברו, כנדר שנדר משה ליתרו, לישב עמו להנאתו, וכשבוע צדקיהו לנבוכדנצר, דמייתם מסמוך שהייתה לתועלתו כדי שלא יבזו. אבל נדר שנדר שלא לצורך חברו, מתירים לו שלא בפניו. So Sarana says, you should know that some Rishonim were posking that this whole sugya is relevant only to nedarim that have to do for the good of the audience, like Moshe and Tzidkiyahu. Again, Moshe, when he did the neder to sit and stay with Yitro, it was for Yitro's good. So that's why Yitro has to be present and to consent to having the neder be made for, because it was for his benefit. And also Nebuchadnezzar, it was for Nebuchadnezzar's benefit. So if you have a neder that is for somebody's benefit, that's when you have to have him present. But if it's not for his benefit, you're just a bystander, then this halacha is irrelevant to you. So the Ran starts by bringing us this day of the Rishonim, and then he continues and says, says the Ran, this psak is only according to one daya in the Yerushalmi. In the Yerushalmi you have two dayot, as we saw. כיוון שהתבייש בחברו שהנדר היה לנעתו ועכשיו רוצה שיתירו לו, והייתה מה לא שייך אלא כשהנדר היה לנעתו. הלאו הכי, משמע, מתירים אותו אפילו שלא בפניו. Says the Ran, those who are passing this were machriin according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, why do you have to have the audience? Because you want to have the person be mitbayesh. Busha is relevant only if you did neder to somebody's benefit, and then you don't feel comfortable when you're being measured in neder because you're going against his interests. That's mipnei busha. Miu continues the Ran. If you think mipnei chashad, then also bystanders will have to come, because also bystanders might be choshed a person that maybe he's not doing his nedarim. So says the Ran, if you're posking according to bifnei chashad, you will say that always the audience has to be part. Continues the Ran and says, there's another nafkamina between these two different dayot. If I think lifnei abusha, so he really has to be present there, because you don't have busha if the person is in Zoom or is in WhatsApp. But if it's only to make sure that the person is not being choshed you can also be just modia. למאן דאמר מפני הבושה, דבטו איכה בין הנתרי לישני, דלמאן דאמר מפני החשד, כל שיהודיהו מתירים לו אפילו שלא בפניו, דתו ליכה חשדה, ולמאן דאמר מפני הבושה אפילו יהודיהו דווקא בפניו, שכל שלא בפניו ליכה בושה. So let's go over what the Ran said. The Ran says, some people are pasking that it's only relevant, this deen, if you did an neder in the benefit of your audience. And says the Ran, that's because they're pasking mipnei abusha. But if you think mipnei chashad, you will always need the audience. And that's the first nafkamina. Second nafkamina is, if you need the audience there present, if you think mipnei abusha, you will be needing the presence. And if you think mipnei chashad, it will be enough to send a WhatsApp. Okay, so that's the first Ran. Let's continue. Continues the Ran and says, what happens if you brought the person over, but he doesn't want you to be made for the neder? Are you allowed to be made for this neder? Starts the Ran and says, okay, so if we have a neder that wasn't for the benefit of the bystander, obviously he's not relevant, because the Ran is asking, you will have to have him present because you don't want him to be choshed, but what he thinks is irrelevant. אבל בנדר שהוא לנעתו, ודאי אין מתירים לו אלא מדעתו, וכן כתב רבנו תם ז"ל. Says the Ran, if you have a neder that was for somebody's benefit, it's not enough to have him present. He has to consent. And says the Ran, that's Rabbeinu Tam's psak. Continues the Ran and answers the question, what happens if you were in a situation like this? You did a neder for the benefit of somebody else, and the Rav did not pull him over, and he did not give his consent, but the Rav was mefer the neder. Did the hafara work? מיהו? היכא שיתראו שלא מדעתו, אישר נדרו לא, צריכה עיונה. So let's see what's the iyun that the Ran does in this question. If you're asking according to Rabbanit, what happens if the Rav did not go according to halacha? B'diavad, is this neder mufar? Says the Ran, on one side, I can prove to you that b'diavad, it will be mufar. Okay? What are the rayot? Two rayot. Echad, ברק השולח משמע בדיעבד הותר הנדר. Remember the Gemara and Gittin that we saw that it seemed to be contradictory? The Ran says, it's not contradictory. Our Gemara talks lechatchila, that Gemara talks b'diavad. We saw that Gemara she'efshar le'adil neder almana, and this neder was in the benefit of the yatomim. אלא שמע מינא דאפילו לעד חברו כל שתראו בדיעבד מותר. One proof, the Gemara and Gittin, not a contradictory, but לכתחילה הם בדיעבד. Second proof, הנמילה מדשארו לסנהדרין לצדקיהו. יעשו בדיעבד אינו מותר, חכיה בשאר ללך לצדקיהו לגילוי המילתא, משמע דיעבד שרי. Says the Ran, here at the end of the sugya, we saw that the Sanhedrin were made for Tzidkiyahu's neder, and it worked. Obviously it worked. So this, our sugya, proves that b'diavad it works. And also, the sugya in Gittin. The neder of Tzidkiyahu obviously was in the benefit of Nebuchadnezzar, and still the Havara worked. And neder almanah is also a neder in the benefit of the Yatumim. And you see there that the Gemara assumes that it will be something legitimate, or it worked halachically if the Rav was Mayfair the neder, even though the Yatumim were not there. Continues the Ran and says, okay, so if b'diavad it's mutar, so but lechatchila it's asur. Lechatchila it's asur, but if you did it anyway, diavad it works. So if it's asur, how can it be that the Sanhedrin did this? Miu asur v'hech tishar elei Sanhedrin letzidkiyahu. Okay, so we have another question. How can the Sanhedrin go according to halacha and do something b'diavad? Continues the Ran and says, "Ika le'meimar ולדבר מצווה מתירים." וצדקיהו הווה מצטער ביותר שלא יכול לגלות ומתבטל על ידי כך ממלאכת שמיים, גם מצוות המלך שמצווה עליהם להתיר מצווה היא עליהם לקיים, וכך תרצו בתוספות. ומכל מקום משמע בדיעבד מותר, דאי לא מאי הענה ליד צדקיהו מדשאר ליקדמו חכנה מיהו סנהדרין. Says the Ran, what we learn from the story of Tzidkiyahu is that sometimes it is mutar lechatchila to do something lo b'fanav. One is in mutar lechatchila if it's for a dvar mitzvah. Tzidkiyahu was having real trouble to function, and he couldn't do mitzvot. He was really hurtful, and also he was a king, and it's mitzvah to do what the king asks. So that's why the Sanhedrin could lechatchila be mayfair lo b'fnei Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, that's the first commentary of the Ran. Continues the Ran and says, but others are cholik on this. Says the Ran, some others, who will see who these others are, thought that this proof from Gittin and the proof from our sugya are not good proofs. Why? Says the Ran, to prove from our sugya that it's mutar, that it works. This whole sugya is talking about how the galut started from this. Because they were made for this neder. Then it sounds as if it did not work. And it's a menad be'eluim. Says the Ran, kach katav harayvad. Okay, that's the day of the Ravid. The Ravid thinks this is not a raya, afuch. This is raya listor. Utzeu ema al tabo. ובסנהדרין, וההיא דגיטין נמי לאו ראיה היא. בנדר אלמנה, מכיוון שנדרה ליתומים, מהי תועלת יש לתינוקות ואיסור פירותיה? Okay, the second proof from Gittin is a little harder to move aside. And what the Ravid claims here is that the neder of Gittin is not really in the benefit of the Yatumim. It is true that this neder allows the almanah to get her money. But the Yatumim are not really interested in the almanah not eating fruits or vegetables or whatever it was that she was nodir. They're only interested in knowing that they really gave her what she deserves and she's not taking money from them. It's really a neder in the benefit of the almanah and not in the benefit of the Yatumim. Ve'od, says the Ran, the Ran says maybe even it didn't work bichlad, but the woman thinks that it works. And he says, when we learn Gittin, read my commentary again and see how I explain that sugya in Gitin. So let's sum up what we saw here in the Ran. What happens if I really did a neder in the benefit of somebody else, and the Rav did not call him over, or maybe he called him over but he did not consent? Will the hafara take place? So, first answer is yes, and that's proven from Gitin and the Sipur of Tzidkiyahu, and it is mutar to do it l'dvar mitzvah. On the other hand, the Cholkim say no, Gitin is not a neder l'tovat hayatomim, and that's why it works. And in Tzidkiyahu, it did not work. The Sugya is talking to you and saying that that's why Yerushalayim and the Sanhedrin and Tzidkiyahu and Sanhedrin suffered, because they went according to halacha and the neder was not mufar. The Ran and the Ravid think the latter. Who is the Bar Plukta? Who is the person who said this whole different commentary that the Ran brought first in his comments? That is the Tosfot and the Sugya. So now we can read the Tosfot. It's a little bit harder and see that the Tosfot is a very big Bar Plukta here, and he thinks that the Avad you can be mefer and maybe even lechatchila. Let's see. The Tosfot asks. דתנן עמוד הארנן, מחברו שנדר בפניו שלא ייהנה ממנו, אין מתירים לו אלא בפניו. לכאורה, משמע דלפניו, היינו דבא מדעתו, וקשה, דעך לא שייך, שהרי נדר מעצמו שלא ייהנה מחברו, אין שום סברה שצריך דעתו להתיר נטרו. לכן נראים, בפניו אינו אלא מפני החשד, ואפילו בעל כוחו, כיוון שיהיה בפניו. לכן משמע מדין במדיין לך ויתר נדרכה, שאפילו בעל כוחו של יתרו, ועד הסוגיה דעך תמה, דמפני החשד. ובירושלמי מפורש שני טעמים, אחד מפני החשד, אחד שלא יחשדו שעובד על נדרו, ולא נשאל לחכם, ולאותו הטעם אין צריך דעתו כדי פרשית, ועוד מפרש טעם אחר מפני הבושה, שאנחנו רוצים שיתבש בפניו, ושמעתי כטעם עד מפני החשד. First says Tosfot, our sugya is possible according to Rabbi Yochanan. Our sugya says that the reason that you're calling the audience over, even if the audience was somebody who it was for his benefit, you're not interested in his daya. You're interested in him so he won't be choshed the person. And if the Rav is made for it, it's mufer. Continues the Tosfot and says, דלא כפירוש רבנו תם, דגיטין. דמפרש בדבר שעשה לו טובה לידי הנדר, דרך המודר הנאה על זה, ולא כאמר המדיר חברו. Says the Tosfot, I know that Rabbeinu Tam is cholik. Rabbeinu Tam thinks that if it wasn't somebody's benefit, you have to have his consent. I disagree. And I think that even if it wasn't somebody's benefit, you don't need his consent, because I'm pasking mipnei ha-chashad, and not mipnei ha-busha. Okay, let's continue. The second part of the Tosfot. The Tosfot himself asks, ואם תאמר, מה בדעתו של צדקיהו, מה הייתה מועלת לו ההתרה שלו בפניו, וסנהדרין למה התירו לו? יש לומר, בצדקיהו מצטער ביותר שלא היה מגלה השבועה, והיה מתבטא במלאכת שמיים, והפך כמו לדבר מצווה. Says the Tosfot, I have a similar question like the Ran asked, because I still think that halachically you have to have the audience, and here in Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't there. Says the Tosfot, I agree with the Ran, or the Ravid, in this point, that this whole din is lechatchila, and b'diavad l'dvar mitzvah, share le'atir. So, I want to sum up the deod of the Rishonim. Tosfot thinks that even if you did a neder in somebody's benefit, you're not interested in his consent. You're interested in his presence because you're afraid of his chashadot. And it sounds as if it's enough also to let him know, to send an SMS. And it sounds also, from what the Tosfot said, that if you have a good reason to be mefer, you won't even try to contact him because it's the dvar mitzvah. And that's how he reads the sugya. However, the Ran and the Ravid read the sugya differently. The Ran and the Ravid say, no, if it's in somebody's benefit, you have to have his consent. And Rabbeinu Tam is also asking that. But the avad, it won't work if it was somebody's benefit. Even if you will try to be made for it, it won't work. And that's actually what happened to Tzidkiyahu and Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so today we really did a short iyun in the sugya. So what we saw was Machloket, Tosfot, Rabbeinu Tam, Ravid, and Ran. And this is a short iyun. If you want to go more in depth, go to Shulchan Aruch, Siyad Rishonim, and different ways of understanding it. But what I think is very interesting in this sugya, that we see here a good example, that sometimes the Yerushalmi really helps us understand the Bavli, and also be pasking halacha, and the Yerushalmi is a very big integrative part of how the Rishonim learn. And B'ezrat Hashem, now you're doing Ki'ut Daf Yomi on the Bavli. Maybe later in your life you'll also be able to do a Bikyu Daf Yomi in the Yerushalmi, or at least open the Yerushalmis that Tosfot thinks are relevant. So I hope you enjoyed the Gefet today. Take care and continue with your strong learning. And see you Bezrat Hashem, Bli Neder, Shavua Haba.